Chapter 17. There was a youth camp soon where hundreds of people my age would be meeting and going to services. When we arrived, I stepped out into an electric atmosphere, a blur of people scurrying in every direction, talking excitedly. The dry heat whipped around my face, as that was the only uncovered part of me. Long sleeves, pants and skirts were required of all campers. I didn't always wear long sleeves outside of church, so I felt a bit awkward, but everyone was doing it. Services started out a bit stifled early in the week, but by the end, things got wild. People wept and prayed and hugged. Some jumped, collided, were knocked down, or were poked in the eyes. I began spinning with my eyes closed until I was on the ground, having toppled an entire row of folding chairs. It was all for the glory of God. Much of the church services were geared toward keeping young people in church. Avoid the world and do isolating church things. Study and memorize the Bible. Have conviction to wear the most modest clothing all the time, conviction meaning it shouldn't be a burden to do. After service, the evening air buzzed with cooking food and conversations. I talked to a couple people, but they weren't quite on fire. However, when I met people who were, they were distant and uninterested. I had stumbled into learning about the church's class structure. The class structure was more easily seen at camp since people weren't separated by large age gaps. Higher classes received better treatment from leadership and more respect from members. The lowest class were those that openly rejected church. These sullen individuals were often forced to attend by their parents and were mostly avoided. The most esteemed class was the on-fire members. Praised for going above and beyond, on-fire members were usually aloof and distant, but happily interacted with people during service and church events. They stayed away from anything that could appear sinful, and were guarded around people who weren't equally on fire. Only until this writing did I realize how much we looked down on others. I also realized that I needed to push people away to make it through church life. I had given up everything to get where I was. If I let someone in, I might relive the pain of loss. Even worse, relationships could take time away from God. That wouldn't bode well for my eternal future, and I never budged an inch on this commitment until I married. Pressure to join and grow in the ministry was common for this group. The remaining and largest class were the basic members, who had most of the friendships, and were split into several categories. At the top of the basic class were the members with church-based identities. While they may not go door-to-door recruiting members, they were open about their religion in public and fully embraced church life. They dressed the part, participated in church projects, stuck together, and sometimes contributed to service music. They looked happy most the time, but that was required in this class. Uncut hair was especially celebrated and longer was better. These members have additional interests or hobbies that didn't directly involve God and church. This usually meant they didn't climb far in the church power hierarchy. Below the church identity class was the go-with-the-flow class. If song service was dreary, they were dreary. If people were demonstrative, they were demonstrative. Often this class was burnt out, but didn't want to fight the system. They were encouraged to move up the class structure, but were often viewed with pity as weak-willed and vulnerable. Next were the secret rebels. Some were suspected of rebellious behavior, and were classified as close to hell, but others flew under the radar within all the classes. People suspected of worldly behaviors, like watching movies or wearing less modest clothes, received backbiting and disapproval. However, some rebels confidently worked the system, boldly declaring their minor worldly deeds. They couldn't be easily accused because they occasionally outperformed their accusers in church. Some rebels took this to the extreme, being publicly seen as righteous preachers, but in private they routinely exposed themselves and sexually bullied members. At the bottom of the basic class were rebels with risky behavior. Smoking was inviting the devil into your body. We weren't supposed to look sinfully at someone who is fully clothed, so premarital sex was unthinkable. Enough people were having sex at camp that counselors started checking females for undergarments before they left their sleeping quarters. No checks were done for males. If an unmarried male had sex, he was distanced and talked about behind his back. Females, on the other hand, were bitterly shamed at every turn, and each one I knew was driven out of the church. When one girl was outed for premarital sex, her mother spread word of it throughout the church. It was heartbreaking to watch everyone try to crush her with scorn and disdain each time she entered the room. I felt defeated when I said goodbye and could only sympathize with my eyes. The church shaming rules prevented me from talking with her, otherwise my own character might be called into question. As I realized this class structure meant most camp members were not on fire, I walked off into the night and wept for their souls. Even if we tried our hardest, we could only be saved by grace, so leaving church early to hang out with friends was gambling with salvation. When I got back from camp, I changed into a short-sleeve shirt, but felt uncomfortable. I had worn long sleeves for a week, and had been told for years to go full-time. I labeled the discomfort as a sign from God that I was convicted of wearing long sleeves now, and was enthusiastically praised for my decision. Next, I enter into the world of miracles.